Good evening, everyone. Shall we start? Welcome. My name is Mark Bowden, and I've got the honour of chairing proceedings this evening. Just to mention that I'm not in any, and never have been in any political party, although I have spent a career in practical politics. And as I look around the room, I see a number of people whose political decisions I've spent my life implementing. No more. And of course, I've also spent my life implementing the decisions of people like our speakers this evening, and indeed, in one case, decisions of one of our speakers this evening. We'll come back to that later. So it's a pleasure to be here with you this evening. A couple of small administrative points. The first is, do be aware, in case it makes a difference, do be aware that we are being recorded and we are being broadcast live on Facebook. Well, there you are. And for those who understand these things, if you wish to, you can, on your Facebook, invite your Facebook friends to watch this live now or later. And then, of course, you can make sure to ask a question, and I'll see you do that. The evening is scheduled to finish at 9:15. We can be a bit flexible about that. But please, we booked the room for later, deliberately, so people can stay behind and chat and network and all that other good stuff as well. So don't feel the need to rush off when formal proceedings close. Our speakers this evening, we're very grateful to our speakers this evening, Andrew Adonis and Molly Scott Cato, whom you all know, for giving of their time, their very valuable time, in their very busy schedules, to come here this evening. I've seen something of their schedules, and it is quite astonishing what they're both doing. So we're very grateful, Molly, for you finding the time to be here this evening. Their schedules are so busy that Andrew Adonis has been going to and now coming from London today, from an engagement elsewhere yesterday evening, and he'll be joining us later, hopefully by about 8:15. So that's just an illustration of how busy these good folk are. Just to mention in passing, in case anyone wonders, we did invite Claire Perry to be here this evening.
She might still turn up.
She might still turn up.
Usually they.
Something of our speakers perhaps do. Oh, first of all, in terms of the evening, Molly will speak, and then there'll be an opportunity for questions. Andrew will speak, then there'll be an opportunity for questions. But what I'd like, if I may, is to suggest that we also have a discussion, sort of back and forth. And after a few questions of each of our speakers, and at the end, both of our speakers, and please, let's all be pretty relaxed about that. Do please feel free to turn it into a discussion within the room. Somebody asks a question, the speaker answers, well then you answer. Or you express a view and somebody else comment. Why not? So, our two speakers. Firstly, Andrew Adonis. I suspect everyone in the room is very familiar with this distinguished gentleman, a member of the House of Lords and a Privy Councillor. He's had a remarkable career, first in academia, then as a journalist. He served as a councillor on Oxford City Council, but, and this is going to be a theme this evening, after my day, he then moved on to the policy unit with Tony Blair and became head of the policy unit in due course. Then he was elevated, if that's the right word, to House of Lords, and became a Minister for Education, and then under Gordon Brown, Secretary of State for Transport. So an enormously distinguished career, and he's remained at the centre of events subsequently, as I'm sure you all know. Our other speaker this evening is Molly Scott Cato. She is a member of the European Parliament for the South West region and a member of the Green Party. Molly comes from the region. I think she was educated in Bath, and has had what can only be described as a glittering academic career. The highlight of which, I have to share with you, the highlight of which is living and working in Aberystwyth and gaining a PhD from Aberystwyth University. Now guess where I went. But actually, her PhD is enormously interesting. The employment policy for the South Wales valleys. And that subsequently became a book called The Pit and the Pendulum, which I think I'm going to read. So guess where I came from. Molly then went on to a number of academic posts in Aberystwyth and Cardiff, and then became a Professor of Strategy and Sustainability at Roehampton University. Molly's wide expertise perhaps concentrates on three areas: the green economy, social enterprise, and the economics of cooperatives, subjects in which I'm very interested myself, and then the monetary system. So Molly has clearly a great expertise in matters around economics, and of course an intimate knowledge of matters of European Union, so we couldn't have hoped for a better and more relevant speaker this evening. At the moment I know that Molly's enormously busy with issues and current activity around climate change and around exploring some of the more interesting and murkier facts about some of the billionaire backers that are leaving the European campaign, of which I'm sure we'll be discovering more and more as the years go by, hopefully weeks go by. Thank you for joining me, it's much appreciated. Molly's widely published. She also has experience of local government, having been a councillor for Stroud District Council, until in 2014 she became a member of the European Parliament, as I mentioned, where, not surprisingly, she sits on the Committee on Economic and Monetary Affairs. So, who better to open this evening than Molly Scott Cato? And Molly, I hand over to you.
Can you hear me? Yeah. Excellent. I do have a tendency to speak very quickly, so if I do that, somebody at the back wave at me and I'll remember to slow down. So I'm going to escape from behind the table, but I won't start prancing around there, probably, unless I get really angry. I'll be here so I can see the slides at least. And thank you very much to my assistant who will move us on. So let's try the first slide. Okay, I'm going to have to prance around here because I can't see my own slides, I'm sorry. So this is just what I'm going to be talking about tonight. I'm going to talk about the damage that Brexit's going to do. I'm going to talk about, as the chairman kindly said, I will be talking about how the referendum campaign was won and the skullduggery around that. And I'll also be talking about what sort of shifts of power are going on around Brexit. I won't talk very much about the parliamentary process. I think Andrew Adonis will cover that, and I'm not sure anybody can really explain what's going to happen there, but I'll probably leave that part there. But I'm going to talk also about what we can do at the end of all of this. And we have to, obviously these slides have been having to be updated on an hourly basis, so they can also be out of date already, but let's hope not. So I think, to me, what's going on with Brexit is very much about a shift in power. It's about certain people using this opportunity to gain power for themselves. And that's a theme I'm going to be returning to throughout the evening. So Dominic Raab is a very interesting person in this connection because he is a long-standing protege, as it says here, of the IEA. A lot of people who are driving Brexit have a very particular view of the economy, and it's actually quite an extreme view and a long way away from the centre of gravity of where most British people are. And they are using disgruntlement with the EU in order to effect that power shift and that power grab. And I was quite shocked in the way that Dominic Raab became the Brexit Secretary, partly because he's got such a track record of having this very particular economic position, but also because it was quite apparent he was the wrong sort of person to try and negotiate a reasonable compromise with the European Union, as has been proved. And I think as a result of his very ideological position, he was effectively sidelined in the negotiations, which were then undertaken, as we know, by Ollie Robbins and the Prime Minister. But you can see here the kinds of things that he believes are important. So his book, called The Assault on Liberty, was launched actually at the IEA, and it talked about the the importance of abolishing workers' rights and creating for-profit schools, and a lot of other, I think, entirely unsavoury views that he holds that have nothing to do with what I think of as the Conservative Party position. So now we've got a new Brexit secretary. I think his name sort of, Google collapsed because everybody was saying, who's Stephen Barclay after he was appointed? So why was he chosen? Well, he was chosen clearly for his loyalty. He did support Leave, but he's a very loyal Tory and he hasn't rebelled against the whip once in 8 years. That's quite an achievement. They probably sort of started on that list, the least likely to rebel, and they came up with this guy. But it's important to note that it actually isn't the job it was before, because it's very much the case that Theresa May has now got complete control of this process, and so his job is going to be planning for the disasters that Brexit will bring, rather than actually negotiating with the EU. Okay, so this is, I couldn't resist, I had to put something about poll barking, because obviously I represent Cornwall as well. It's, the whole discussion around Brexit and trade, I think, has been the biggest fantasy really that's been sold during the whole Brexit discussion. This idea of global Britain, this idea that somehow we could go forth and rebuild relationships with New Zealand, that we could join the Trans-Pacific Partnership. I mean, when I first heard that, I thought it was a joke. In fact, I wrote a post on the Guardian website about, actually, if you recall, the mutiny on the Bounty took place in the Pacific, and some of the mutineers that survived lived on Pitcairn Island. So I said, oh great, Pitcairn Island, that must be, our stake in the Pacific, and that's how we're joining the Trans-Pacific Partnership. But anyway, I was wrong to stop, because this is actually a serious proposal that Fox is coming forward with now. And it's just, to me, it's all part of a fantasy to persuade us to leave the main, biggest market that we are actually engaged with, for some dreams of something that might succeed in the future. So, this is very serious issue for the people I represent in the South West. So I had a long conversation with a farmer and cheesemaker, the blessed cheesemakers of Somerset, who was deeply concerned about how he would be able to export his cheese after, in fact, March next year. Because Liam Fox in the Trade Department had said, no problem, all the other countries with whom the EU has trade deals, will just roll those over to make life easy for us. So, if you're exporting to South Korea through the EU South Korea Trade Partnership Framework, that will just carry on. But actually those countries have said no, they won't roll over that framework. And this isn't even about the transition, this is about what will happen in March. So I wrote to Liam Fox and said, how can I reassure my constituents, how will he be able to export his cheese? And there was actually no reply at all. Usually you do get, well, you've done this, haven't you? So you usually get some kind of meaningless kind of reply, but in this case just no reply at all. Because there isn't an answer to that question. And like so many of these issues around Brexit, you just don't even see that being reported very much. I mean, it's a really serious issue for all exporters who export beyond the EU, and it simply isn't being discussed or addressed. And of course, the EU's in the process all the time of negotiating additional trade agreements. I mean, I'm not a big fan of the EU's trade policy. I'm a kind of constant critic of Trade Commissioner Malmström, who now recognises me in the corridor and runs the other way. No, it's not as bad as that. But I mean, I think we ought to be focusing on the human rights potential of our trade agenda much more than we are. But nonetheless, it should be said that the EU is one of the really powerful trade players, and we are deliberately extracting ourselves from that, and it just makes no sense at all to do that. And of course, it's particularly serious in the context of the election of Trump and his attitude to trade, which is incredibly bellicose and self-centred, really. So when he offers us a really, really good trade deal, because he doesn't say who it'll be really, really good for, does it? But, when you take the slogan, make America great again, it's hard to think that it's going to be great for us. And this is really the big choice we have to make about trade if we go ahead with Brexit. It's going to be, do we stick to the EU standards where we have high animal welfare and worker protection and we respond to climate imperatives and so on? Or do we take the race to the bottom route that the US takes? And, it will have to be one or the other, because if you're a farmer in the southwest, you're either producing your cattle with hormones and antibiotics or you aren't. And if you have competition coming from the US and they are using those techniques to reduce prices, then you have to be able to do that to compete. So that's really the choice we're going to be facing. And as we'll see later, the people driving Brexit are very much focused on us moving towards the US model. And of course, the other thing Trump is doing is sort of shifting away from this international, multilateral kind of approach to trade, where you get together under a rules-based system that you've all agreed through the World Trade Organization, and instead he's kind of singling out individual countries and getting them in the corner and bullying them, effectively. And this is a really crazy thing. Every time you hear them say, oh, you know, we're going to leave the EU and trade on WTO rules, the WTO is in serious crisis at the moment. And in fact, all we'd be doing is swapping a negotiation with 27 countries for a negotiation with 163 countries, one of which is Argentina, you know, and as if they're going to help us. It's a completely unrealistic view of what's going on. And one of the first agreements there was between the UK and the EU was that the sort of schedules and tariff agreements that we have through being part of the EU should be shared fairly with us. So we should take our sort of share of the quotas that, you know, our population represents as part of the EU total. But that was immediately blocked by various players at the WTO who said, well, we're not going to give the UK the same sort of deal that we've given to the EU, which is 10 times as large. And so immediately we see our weakness. And this issue is, from an economist's point of view, this is the most serious. You know, our economy is completely entwined with the European economy. And now we know we're going to be, if the deal's agreed, we will be staying within this system for 2 years, really. But we know nothing. I mean, this is the point about the agreement that will probably be reached this weekend. It says absolutely nothing about what will happen beyond 2021. So when I get on to talking about the Brexit syndicate and what they have in mind, we've got to remember that they have the power to make that happen. There's nothing legal protecting us against that. Okay, so obviously I am very concerned about farmers. They are a key constituency here in the South West, including, of course, in Wiltshire. So exports in the South West represent 2 million tonnes a day. And there's some very interesting work being done by the Agriculture and Horticulture Development Board calculating the impact of Brexit on various sectors. So some sectors they think would gain, but most would certainly lose under this unilateral liberalisation, which is what the extreme Brexiteers are suggesting. So we won't put any tariffs on at all, you know, and that we would then face really serious competition from farmers who just operate in a different kind of way, but also on a completely different scale. Because it's the nature of South West. If you think about Devon, it's small-scale family farms very largely, and they simply cannot compete at scale in order to reduce prices. And I just think we're going to see, anyway, we're not, because I don't think we're going to go ahead with this, but you know, if we did take that route towards a hard Brexit, it would be extremely tough on our farmers. And also, of course, you've probably heard Barnier is a great fan of these protected designated indicators, which means that a Cornish pasty has to be made in Cornwall. But so those have been agreed again for the transition, but beyond that, there's no agreement on that, and you can't get an agreement on that really through the WTO. So we're going to be having, you know, Ottawa Cornish pasties, or who knows what horrors are coming. But yes, that's another protection that our farmers really rely on, which we're very likely to lose. Okay, what's next? Yes, well, just a little bit more about Wiltshire. I'm not sure, did he come to Wiltshire during the bus tour? Mr. Johnson? Boris Johnson? No. Obviously he started off in my patch down in Cornwall. I was infuriated, actually, but not much I could do about it. But yes, I mean, the impact studies, such as they are, show that the South West could face a 5% drop in the size of the economy if we went ahead, certainly under the no-deal scenario. And I was actually, the reason I arrived here on the train, sort of slightly frazzled, is because I was in a meeting with the Information Commissioner earlier on. And one of the things I was talking about there is this real struggle to get the information about the Brexit impact studies out from the government. And I actually started that in my office purely because I noticed an article in the newspaper saying a civil servant had let something slip on a train, and people had seen there were all these studies into the impact that Brexit would have. And so I thought, well, that would be very useful to see. So, you know, I wrote to DEXIU and said I'd really like to see those studies. And no, you can't. You know, they're secret. You can't know what the impact of Brexit would be, which I, as a representative, I found quite extraordinary. But I couldn't see them, and they couldn't be made public. And so I started various freedom of informations and legal action and so on. And they used various exceptions from the freedom of information regime, one of which was that this would damage our relations with other countries. Also, they claimed national security would be damaged, which is quite interesting in itself, I think. And then, as you know, in the end, Labour found a parliamentary wheeze to get this information to the DEXE committee, who then leaked it. But it's interesting to know that the actual information about the economic impact of Brexit is still in very summary form. And for an economist like me, I really want to know, how did you get to those estimates? You know, it's a piece of economic modelling, really. It doesn't mean anything unless you know which model they've used, and that is still being kept secret. And of course, now that we have the actual deal, we need to be able to compare the economic impact of that with staying in the European Union. And that's basically what I was talking to the Information Commissioner about. How can we make sure that information comes out? But I'm not at all confident that it will be. Anyway, yes, I've talked about farmers before, but just to say that if you think about the farming in the South West, it's very largely based around meat production. Most of that's, it says 95%, I think it's a bit less than that, but it's exported straight into the EU. If we don't have a non-tariff regime, it would be a 40% tariff, and you can see that then it would be so much cheaper to import wheat from elsewhere. So I had a very sad experience when I was at Duchy College down in Cornwall, and I spoke to two women, both of them sheep farmers, both had built up their own businesses, both had voted Leave without any conception that would, without any doubt, destroy their businesses. And this is one of the things that I think is most infuriating to me about Brexit, that people were just not informed about the personal impact on them, and then the impacts have also been concealed. I like this picture because I have a joke about this picture, which is, when that scaffolding comes up, will we have a fair voting system of the Democratic House of Lords and the Constitution? Because I think it absolutely is symbolic of the really serious problems we've got with our democracy. And of all the crises that Brexit has given rise to, I think the constitutional crisis is really the most fundamental. And wherever we go forward from here, we have to make sure we have serious and significant constitutional reform, I think, so we don't get into this sort of hole again. Anyway, as I said, it's much better for us to ask our questions of Andrew Adonis about this, because the sort of arcane nature of Westminster politics, I mean, I think it probably dates back to this guy's time. You know, it feels very 18th century to me, compared to how the European Parliament works. And so it's quite hard to fathom, I find it's quite hard to fathom what goes on there. But anyway, we do know that as the withdrawal bill went through, we had a lot of decisions that were delegated to Henry VIII powers, which means there isn't a full parliamentary process. An enormous amount of law needs to be changed through this process, and a lot of that is being rushed through now using what they call statutory instruments, which means there isn't full scrutiny by your representative and my representative as well. There was an option to stay in the European Economic Area, which is the kind of form of Brexit that's referred to as soft Brexit, which I find constitutionally totally unacceptable because it means a significant loss of sovereignty, but nonetheless it would have much less significant economic impact. And that was, I think there would be a majority actually in Parliament for that, but unfortunately Labour did not support that amendment. I actually met Barnier we had him in our group the day that vote was happening in Parliament, and the Labour whips were telling their MPs that they couldn't vote for them. You couldn't be in the customs union and the single market. This was complete nonsense, but that's what Labour MPs are being told. So I had that really lucky opportunity that hardly ever happens in life, and I kind of had the horse's mouth right next to me. So I took a photograph of myself with Barnier, and I said, well, can I tweet that? Actually, you told me that it's fine to be in both of those. So I did that, and the Independent very kindly reported that, and apparently a lot of MPs from Labour were saying, really? The whips told me. Unbelievable, the sort of stuff that's happened. But anyway, to my mind, I mean, I don't think this is a good option, because I don't think we should do Brexit at all. But if we are going to do it, this is an option which would probably command a majority of Parliament, and we could have gone down that route. But because of ridiculous parliamentary shenanigans, the Lords passed this amendment, and then Labour whipped against it in the Commons, which was a serious derogation of duty, I think. The Charter of Fundamental Rights has survived, but a lot of environmental protections have been lost along the way. For example, the most serious, I think, is the precautionary principle, which is fundamental in European law. And as a Green, I can use that all the time. So what it means is you don't take a risk. If you think something might have a dangerous impact on the environment or on public health, you don't go ahead with it until you're sure it's safe. It's the reverse of the way US policy works, in that they will introduce something like GMO, for example, and they'll wait to find the consequences. So it's a much more risky way of dealing with new technologies. And in fact, it's very difficult to prove that a genetically modified organism is responsible for a particular illness anyway. And so you can have, as with thalidomide, you can have a lot of health damage before you find the problem. So to me, the precautionary principle and a great deal of other environmental protections have already been lost as law was transferred from the EU into UK law. So this is that very famous meeting at Chequers, where the Prime Minister, the really strange thing about this event was the way, we've got a deal. We've got a deal because we've managed to get Tories to stop tearing each other to shreds. Never mind Labour, never mind the half the people in the country that didn't think Brexit was a good idea anyway. And then never mind the fact that the EU is never going to accept this deal. It was quite obvious from the beginning that what we agreed at Chequers was a have your cake and eat it deal, and that the EU was never going to support that. So there has been this attempt to split the four freedoms. To some extent, the final deal does do that, because the Prime Minister is trying to negotiate a deal where goods can move freely, but much more limited access on services, which is necessary because of the single market rules. And the most dire thing of all, I think, that has been agreed through the Prime Minister's negotiations is this suggestion that the main achievement is to end freedom of movement. I find that absolutely extraordinary. It's like really boasting about depriving children and future generations of significant rights that we've all had. And you may have seen that poll recently conducted by Channel 4, their Brexit programme, and it showed that 63% of people agree that we should be free to live and work in each other's countries. So when you frame freedom of movement as what it really is, rather than inward migration, which is how it's always discussed, most people realise, 2/3 of people realise it's actually a good thing because it's good for us. We have a right to work in 27 other countries and live and claim social security benefits. The Prime Minister is depriving future generations of that and then boasting about it. I find it extraordinary. So what was the last point there? Oh yes, anyway, just to say that the Chequers deal already really conceded quite a lot to the EU, because you have to do that because the EU is never going to change its single market rules for a country that is leaving. And that was why what was promised by the Brexiteers right back at the beginning was always impossible. So it's quite strange from my position, because we've just waited 2 years while this is all ground on, and we've heard all this nonsense about the manufacturers of Prosecco will suddenly ride in and save us all, when it was completely clear from the beginning what the parameters were and where we were going. It's never really been a negotiation. There's so little flexibility around what's possible. Single market rules are there. They're not going to be changed just to suit Britain. They never will. So let's just move on now a little bit to think what's actually been agreed now during the actual withdrawal agreement. As you know, this will come to the extraordinary summit in Brussels on Sunday. I have to go back to Brussels to actually be there outside the council when that gets discussed. No, I do actually have to do some TV, but I really would like to be there anyway. But this is a really important point, that it's only about what will happen during the transition period. Effectively, if MPs vote for this, they are voting for the blindfold Brexit. And it was very nice to hear Jeremy Corbyn acknowledge that, because he's been extremely unclear throughout the process. But yesterday he was very clear that they wouldn't be voting for this because it is indeed this blindfold Brexit. So during the transition we have to abide by the EU rules, but we lose any control over those rules. And that was where that hilarious interview with Nadine Dorries came. What an outrage that we won't have MPs. Sort of needs to go in the list with Dominic Raab, realising we're an island, and various others like James. Anyway, but this is the important point, that nothing is agreed after that. So we've agreed to this financial settlement. There's another kind of lot of drama that evaporated. You know, David Davis is going to go over and bang the table over this £39 billion. No, of course we have to pay that. It's actually for things we've already agreed to pay for and already benefited from. We have had, I think, some significant progress on citizens' rights, although they will not be protected. The European citizens will not continue to be protected by the European Court of Justice, which is still a concern for them. And I think the real tragedy here is two things. One is that this could have been agreed right at the beginning. There was no need to leave people in limbo, whether they live in Spain as UK EU citizens, or whether they live here as non-UK EU citizens. That could have been decided at the earliest stage. And the other tragedy is just the appalling reaction to people that live in our community that have contributed to our community from other EU countries. I mean, we had an event in Brussels by the In Limbo people who have, taken a lot of testimonies, including from children. It was, there was not a dry eye. It was terrible the way they've been treated, culminating in the Prime Minister claiming they jumped the queue, a couple of days ago. People are, it's just, whatever you think our future is, it's certainly going to involve being right next door to these people in these very countries that you're constantly insulting. It's appalling. Anyway, so the main issue that remains unresolved is the Irish border, and this means we have to stay in this close customs relationship with the EU until we resolve something different through the trade negotiations that are going to start once we've agreed the exit deal. The outline is very thin, it's 26 pages now, but none of that is legally binding, so there's complete freedom for what will happen after 2021, and as I said, this will be decided on Sunday. Anyway, feel free to ask me more questions about that, but I'll answer as much as I can, as much as I understand. But I think the really important thing to realise, if you compare that deal with what was offered during the referendum, there's just nothing similar at all. So, there's a whole series of broken promises here. Most shockingly, a lot of people still believe these lies that were told during the referendum. A recent poll showed that 42% of people believe there will be an extra 350 million for the health service, even though the people who promised that just denied it the day after the referendum and all run away. But they still believe that. There's still arguments that the economy won't be affected at all. The German car makers will come and make sure you get this very special deal, that we can have the same amount of money for research and science. Of course, I represent Cornwall, as I already said. I've tried many times to get information about what will replace the large amount of EU funding that goes to Cornwall. It's 3 words: a shared prosperity fund. No detail about what that means, when it will be introduced. Real vulnerability is exposed there. We'll save money on energy bills. That's I don't know quite where that came from. That's not going to happen. People saying lower prices. There's no evidence of any of this, and it's really very clear that the withdrawal agreement that's on the table now is just not what people voted for during the referendum. It's not what they were offered. As it says here, yes, we won't be taking back control. For one thing, we had control anyway, because we had political representatives like me and like our commissioner. But for another thing, we will certainly be giving up control, because we will be agreeing during the transition period to abide by rules where there's been nobody like me having any say over them. And beyond that, we will be essentially having to maintain European rules if we're going to keep that close trading relationship. So, here are some of the promises. I don't need to go through them all, but the cost of getting out would be virtually nil, and the cost of staying in would be very high. And David Davis, there will be no downside to Brexit, only a considerable upside. I think that was the most irresponsible thing. It's obviously a question of trade-offs, but the suggestion, like as it was sold to fishermen, you can make sure nobody else has access to our waters. You can still continue to fish in French waters, and we'll continue to sell more fish to the French. That was never going to happen. It was always going to be about trade-offs. The fishermen I represent, actually, fisheries in the South West has expanded 5 times over since we joined the EU, because they catch shellfish, which they sell in France and Spain. They catch the sort of fish that we didn't want to eat. So, they mostly have realised that this is not good for them. I think the way fisheries has been reported, that all the complex discussions and conversations that are held between fishermen in the South West were not reported, and what we saw was Nigel Farage raising dead fish into the Thames. The level of reporting, I think, has just been shocking. Have you done some work on fisheries? There we are. So if we have any, I freely admit I don't understand the common fisheries policy. It's much worse than rocket science. So if you've got any questions, we'll direct them to you. Okay. Yeah, and this is the other point, I think, where the betrayal feels strongest. The fact that people who sold Brexit so hard are now resigning from that and saying, oh no, it's not about the sunlit uplands now. Why do we have to go ahead with it? Not because it's better, but just because we said we would. Just because we decided we would. I don't know if you saw that Lord who spoke during the withdrawal bill saying, this is like my great aunts had made a plan to go to the cinema, and then I walked past the cinema and I saw it was the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And I said, well, you'll still have to go and watch that. It's not the best thing for the country. We really don't have to go ahead with it. think we've got a little bit about all the scurrilous activity going on. To be honest, straight after the referendum, because the Green Party supported the referendum in Parliament with Caroline Luke as our one MP, and because I support democracy generally, I thought, well, I'll accept that result and see where we're going with it. But even though I knew that the promises could never be delivered, but I think the thing that's turned me most strongly towards trying to stop this process is just realising who's behind it and who's really been driving it. So we set up this website called The Bad Boys of Brexit, mainly to irritate Aaron Banks down here, because that's what his book's called. And actually we have the website, badboysofbrexit.com, which was available, fortunately. I'm actually his MEP. I'm also Jacob Rees-Mogg's MEP, and Liam Fox, so I've got a nice bunch of Brexiteers in my pack. But anyway, we were thinking, why are people driving this? What's really behind this? And they really fell into three categories. There were the money men, who I think I've got another slide talking about them. The regulation burns, which are people who want to say, oh, just let business do anything. We don't want to be constrained. We don't have those annoying laws about not putting pollution into the sea or having to deal with climate change. We just want to be able to let rip with whatever we want. And then we have this very concerning Russian connection as well, which has emerged more now through a bit more attention being paid to what Aaron Banks has been up to. But, the Leave campaign was absolutely not what it first seemed. There's a lot of information on this website and on the sort of parallel website called the Brexit Syndicate, which is about what these people are doing now, sort of rewriting our democratic rules in secret. But I just advise you don't look at it too late at night, because quite a few people say it's kept them up, so it's a lunchtime activity. So this is a very interesting report about what Farage was actually up to on the night of the referendum. So if you recall, he said, he gave an interview saying, oh, well, we've lost the referendum. And so at that point, the pound rose very rapidly, and then when the result came in from Sunderland, and it was clear that Leave probably had one, the pound dropped like a stone. And of course, if you're a money man and you're gambling on financial markets, that kind of prior information, or actually being able to fix markets like that, can make you millions. And Crispin Odey, who I actually bumped into on Bristol Parkway Station, which is very near where Aaron Banks lives, so I'm quite suspicious about that. But anyway, this is his quote from the morning after. I feel fantastic. It's a fantastic decision by the electorate. I think he said, actually, I feel as if my mouth is stuffed with gold or something completely disgusting like that. But anyway, he'd given a huge amount of money to the Leave campaign. He bet on Brexit and made £220 million that night. And he's now taking bets against the pound and against various British companies, I think to the tune of 500 million, £500 million. So this is the kind of pressure that's driving Brexit now, because if it doesn't happen, these people are going to lose big time. And of course the way they win big time is through the disaster capitalist route, which is just create as much chaos as possible. Chaos and volatility is a good thing if you're in these kind of financial gambling circuits. So, yeah, I mean, we wrote to various people about this to try and get some action, and we actually wrote to the pollsters themselves and said, was there some nefarious activity there? And they wrote back and said, no, absolutely not, because of course Farage was taking private polls funded through all that billionaire money that was coming into their campaign. Anyway, now I see that they are investigating, so although they dismissed that, they themselves are concerned about whether polling law itself was broken. And of course there was really the most serious, I mean in a way there was scurrilous activity in Leave.eu. So in my view they're a bunch of crooks, National Crime Agency now investigating Aaron Banks. That's of less concern than the fact that the official Leave campaign also broke the law. Because obviously the official Leave campaign was allowed to spend up to £7 million. They had this government designation, and they also had 6 men on the board who later became cabinet ministers. So when the news came out that the Electoral Commission had actually found they'd exceeded their spending limit by colluding between different Leave campaigns, I immediately called for all of those cabinet ministers to be sacked. I didn't expect that to happen, but I did think that you shouldn't have people running your country who have engaged in law breaking. But no, they've just gone through without any effort to control their behaviour at all. And Boris Johnson and Michael Gove were obviously right at the front of that campaign, which was found to have broken the law by the Electoral Commission. And of course you then had Matthew Elliott coming out and saying this is a politically biased decision, which strikes right at the heart of the rule of law, is extremely damaging that he was allowed to say that on the BBC. And he said, we'll appeal. Well, their appeal was dismissed out of hand yesterday because there is no ground for appeal. The Electoral Commission wasn't an allegation, it was a finding that they had broken the law. In fact, it was only investigated at all because Jolene Morm of the Good Law Foundation took a judicial review against the Electoral Commission. They had dismissed this allegation originally, sweeping it under the carpet. So, it's been, the whole story has been one of tremendous skullduggery and no real legal protections against it. People in high places then wanting to not talk about that, and then a few kind of like heroic individuals insisting on the rule of law being protected, right back to Gina Miller, who took the case to say there had to be a proper parliamentary debate and vote before Article 50 was triggered. Okay, anyway, feel free again, we can talk about that later. Now, the most tricky bit here is who is really taking control through this process, and it's really hard to say. It's really, obviously, if you're talking about spooks, it's pretty hard to pin down what they're actually up to. But the way I see it now, the real battle that's going on is between democracy and authoritarianism. If you look at what Trump's doing, he is absolutely attacking the rule of law, attacking the free press, undermining basic requirements of a democracy, and also, together with Putin, creating this sense of disinformation, so you're not really sure what the reality is. And that shared understanding of reality is absolutely fundamental to a democracy. You can't build a democracy in a situation where half the people believe in conspiracy theories. Some interesting research published today showed the enormous number of people who believe, for example, on the Leave side, that the government's lying to us about the number of migrants coming. Well, where are they receiving that information from? Through Facebook, through Twitter now. There's a huge amount of deliberate disinformation and a lot of it run by Russian bots. So this is the other thing I was talking to the Information Commission about. She's an absolute hero in this. She's really trying hard to control the spread of disinformation and make sure that we can have a proper debate with proper facts between real people, not a sort of people exchanging conspiracy theories and disinformation that originated from the Kremlin and was shared by 50,000 people who were working out of a troll factory in St. Petersburg. That's more like what happened during the referendum campaign. Right, anyway, this is the next website, and this is sort of moving on and saying, after the referendum result came in, to be honest, the whole political setup was in crisis, because if you promise people something impossible, expecting them to say no, and they say yes, what do you do next? I mean, that was the problem that politicians face. And so they were all sort of reverberating in shock and having internal fights and, in my case, weeping into my beer and so on. But in the meantime, these guys were setting up all these organisations and planning what our future was going to look like. And that's why we call this, the Brexit Syndicate, because it's very clearly interlinked number of organisations. 9 of these actually work out of one address, 55 Tufton Street, in Westminster, just around the corner from Europe House, actually. And when the film gets made, it's going to be a bestseller, isn't it? But the Taxpayers Alliance, which outed Shamir Sani, one of the Vote Leave whistleblowers, they were recently found to have dismissed him unfairly after he blew the whistle on them. They sacked him. And also to have smeared him in public, and 9 of these organisations were mentioned in that tribunal case. So there is a conspiracy, and those are the organisations involved. Some of these are also very nasty, like Palantir, which is the all-seeing stone, if you recall. It's like private spooks who use big data to influence elections, as do Cambridge Analytica and SPL Elections sits behind them. So anyway, there's loads more information on this website, again, quite disturbing stuff. I mean, we started looking into this because we just got some suspicions about what might be going on, but it was so much worse than we thought, when we were working on this. Did you know? It was really astonishing and gave you a really nasty feeling, actually. But basically what these guys are doing is they're deciding what our relationship with other countries will look like after we left the EU, and they very much work with similar far-right organisations in the US. So obviously you've got Breitbart here, run by Steve Bannon, who's now trying to, he's set the same thing up in London, and who's now trying to influence the European elections, always shifting in the direction of much less democratic control. And that's why I really, in my mind, this is a battle between us having control through democracy, a flourishing democracy where we choose our representatives and they make decisions, and a situation where You essentially have very rich people paying for these organisations to scrap, like tax law, for example, so they don't have to pay taxes anymore, and push the world very much in their direction. So it's it's worrying times. But anyway, next year I'm doing a whole tour about this, so maybe I'll come to Devizes and talk more about that. But in the meantime, please do watch the materials we're putting together, because it's very much about what can you do. And you've already done the most important thing, which is get together with other people and start to build organisations. Empower yourselves, and I can see you're here tonight, so I know you're already doing that. So yes, finally, what can we do? Well, I mean, even if you thought it was a good idea in 2016, I think an awful lot of people have now changed their minds about that. And a lot of the reasons people were given were either not true, or they just haven't been met by the deal that the Prime Minister's agreed. So I think the most important thing to say is if we as a country have changed our minds, we absolutely have a right to say that. We're living in a democracy. We need to tell our representatives very clearly that we just no longer think it's a good idea, and campaign very strongly for the people's vote and to be able to reverse this decision. Incidentally, a lot of people say to me, there's no point in writing to my MP because they won't agree with me. So let me just say that's not the point of writing to your MP, and you don't have to only do it once. I mean, I know, because I'm a representative, that MPs and MEPs respond to pressure. So I'm not going to guarantee they're going to read every single one. I'm not going to guarantee you're going to get a handwritten response. But I will guarantee that they'll weigh them. And when loads come in, they start thinking, ooh, this is a really important, people really care. And that will make a difference. So I'm absolutely convinced that we can, here is Andrew now, good timing. I'm absolutely convinced that we can turn this around, and for the reasons I've given, not just because it would be bad for us economically, not just because it would be bad for us socially, and it's causing such divisions in our society, but also because our democracy is so much at risk here. So thank you for everything you are doing, and feel free to ask me anything in the questions, and if you think Brexit's a brilliant thing, you can tell me that as well. Thank you very much.
Well, as you can see, Andrew Adonis has joined us just in time for questions. What I think we'll do now is, while Andrew settles down, is we'll take some questions specifically from Molly. And then we'll have some, but Andrew, of course, can join in if he wants to in answering them and having a discussion when he's settled down. So, questions for Molly. Tracy?
Yes, I have a question.
I think there might be a microphone.
All right, okay, thank you. My question was, if we do get a people's vote, which I very much hope we do, what do you think should be on the ballot paper?
I think that's... I need to switch that on then. I think that's really straightforward. I mean, the decision we're making is between an actual deal that's been negotiated that is possible, which is the one that Theresa May has brought back and which will be, I think, agreed in Brussels on Sunday, and continued membership of the EU. I mean, we need to make a choice between two possible options, and those are the two. And I know the Prime Minister's doing her best to portray this as a deal or no deal situation, like some appalling shitty game show, I'm sorry, but it's just so demeaning, the whole debate. But, no deal is not an option. I think no deal's been put there in order to scare us into accepting no deal, and we should just reject that. Obviously, if there is an agreement to have a people's vote, then the Electoral Commission will make that decision. And to me, it's clear. There is a deal. Is that better or worse than continued EU membership?
Sorry, I'm very, very sorry I'm late. It's all Chris Graham's fault, because the trains never arrive on time. They need much better transport secretaries. One is completely right about that, but can I make another point? No deal does not exist. There is no such thing as no deal. Jacob, Nigel Farage and co, they won't define what no deal is. Literally no deal, as the government demonstrated in its all of those deathly papers that were published over the summer would mean that planes don't fly, 6 weeks of medical supplies, not food in the shops, no legal basis for the courts to operate and all that. Nobody thinks that that's doable. So there would have to be some kind of a deal. And I keep, because I spend more of my life than I care to remember, in TV and radio studios with Nigel Farage and Jacob Rees-Mogg. I spend longer with them than members of my own family at the moment. And I have this banter with Jacob. I keep asking him different bits of what no deal would mean. And one of the things that I take to ask him is how much are we going to pay the European Union as the exit fee? Because the Prime Minister's already agreed 50 billion. Which I think is money for old rope, much better than not spend that 50 billion and stay in the EU, which she's agreed that, because that's required to settle debts, all of the accumulated payments we have to make for infrastructure projects, farm payments, a whole lot of things. And if we don't pay that, then of course there'll be no wider deal at all, and we'll be in international courts. So I keep asking Nigel, how much would you pay? And he keeps saying, much less. He said he won't put a figure on it. So the last time I was on his LBC show, because he now gets annoyed when I start saying these things, he said, well, I'll tell you what it'll be, Andrew. It'll be a nice round figure, he said, like 0. And I said, Nigel, it's great that you've at long last told us what the figure's going to be, 0, but it cannot be 0, I said. It simply can't be 0. I said, because if it's 0, Nigel, how are we going to pay your pension? Remember, he said, like, when he was an MEP, he'd been MEP for 20 years, so he has a £73,000 pension. And I said, Nigel, we've got to pay your pension, so we cannot possibly have you being a burden on the state. I said, given your politics, that would be very bad. I said, also, we know, because of the exchanges I've had with him in the past, that both of his children now have German passports. Which I think is a great thing. I think all of the other people in their 20s should also be able to have European Union passports too, which is the reason why we shouldn't be leaving the EU. But I said, so we've got a big problem, Nigel. You'll be a burden on the state, and your kids are going to be in Germany, so there'll be nobody to look after you. So I said, what we've got to decide, I said, because you've got to try and take these people seriously. So what we've got to decide is how many years you intend to live beyond the age of 65, multiply that by £73,000 for each year, allow a very large administration fee, because you keep telling us, Nigel, this European Union is incredibly inefficient and wastes loads of money, so we have to put a lot more. And then that has to be the exit. It doesn't matter if you don't pay Molly and all these other people who've all got their pensions or all these other things, you've got to do that. But what it comes down to all the time on all of these issues is that this thing called no deal can't be done. And we had the final demonstration of it on the Today programme this morning. Did you hear? I couldn't believe it when I woke up, the review of the papers. Fraser Nelson, who is a very right-wing editor of The Spectator magazine, who understands this, is a bright guy. He understands that this thing called no deal isn't really feasible. So he said that the real challenge, he said, for people like him was to have a negotiated no deal. I just leave you with that thought.
The lady in the front row.
I believe are we there now? Thank you. I believe that if Brexit happens, we will have the worst publicly owned asset grab probably unequalled since the enclosures. Would we be in this mess if we had a written constitution?
Well, I mean, having you on shuffle as well. Well, as I said in my presentation, I think that fundamentally this is a constitutional crisis. It is a political crisis. If we had a much stronger constitution, then we wouldn't have got into the mess we've got into. Because, for example, allowing a referendum on, allowing a referendum without clearly determined options is totally unacceptable. I mean, my friends in the Parliament, my German friends particularly, often say, well, can the Prime Minister do this? And I say, well, if he can get away with it in the case of Cameron. That's the kind of way the Constitution works. It's all pushing and shoving and smoke-filled rooms. And it shocks me, really, when I compare it with the way other modern European democracies work and the way the European Parliament works. As another example, amendments in to proposals that come from the Commission, we might have 450 amendments. Every single amendment will be voted unless we, across the parties, negotiate to agree those between ourselves. So, as a Green, I have every power to make amendments on your behalf and to then try and negotiate so that they go into law. I mean, you can tell us about how it works in Westminster, but it doesn't work like that. And then we have the fact that the House of Lords, although I think it negotiated, it debated Brexit much more skillfully with much more knowledge than the House of Commons. Nonetheless, because it isn't a properly democratic chamber, it didn't have the confidence to push that through. And I think in another democracy where you had a very strong second chamber, again, I think that would have operated as a brake and stopped us getting into the mess that we have. So the way David Cameron, kind of with gay abandon, really launched this process to persuade people to vote for something he didn't believe in himself, effectively. I mean, to see a Prime Minister lead the charge for a referendum when he was actually in favour of status quo, that's such a bizarre situation, which he started to solve the problem in his own party. And there's so much chaos created as a result of that. And so I absolutely agree with you. I mean, I studied PP at Oxford. I am one of those dreadful people that did that. And I remember then thinking, oh no, I love the flexibility of the American Constitution, because that's what you're taught. And I totally changed my mind about that, and I would much rather be in Germany right now.
I agree with all that. Just two other points. Of course, the Constitution of Germany, the Basic Law, was largely drafted by Britain after the Second World War. And one of the specific provisions that we inserted was a ban on referendums at the federal level. Because Clement Attlee, who was then the Prime Minister after the war, his view was that national referendums were, in his words, the device of dictators and demagogues. Do you know, I think I sort of agree with him. I think there's something there. So, and if you look at our experience with referendums at national level, what it has been is massively disempowering of our parliamentary democracy. Massive. We're in this ludicrous situation at the moment. If there was a free vote in the House of Commons, 3/4 of the members of the House of Commons would vote against Brexit. Doing their job, as Burke said, to be a representative, not a delegate. What is their best advice? And you see it here in Devizes, because I know your MP well, because she's a former transport minister in my world. I mean, when I'm not having to fight Brexit, the only thing that really matters in life is trains. And of course, you've lost your trains, so it's terrible. We were discussing it in the car coming. I mean, beaching did horrible things to Devizes, which all needs to be reversed. And if I was Transport Secretary forever, you'd have the railways back again, and everything would be milk and honey, you'd never have to worry again. But your MP here for Devizes, she is a Remainer. Let's be clear, she was in favour of Remain 2 years ago, but what's she doing now? She's absolutely stunned. She won't say a word about it. Why? Because she's worried about what's happening inside her local Conservative Party and the referendum. So we're in a situation at the moment where she is not doing what she herself has said in the past and still doing. I assume you're all writing to her an email and all of that, because she does need to be held accountable for that. It's not exactly as this is an issue about where you're going to put a Pelican crossing or something like that. This is the most fundamental issue that's going to affect this community in this generation and the entire country. And so we have somehow got to try and resolve this constitutional issue. Now, the only way through at the moment, as I see it, is the people's vote, the second referendum. Because people like Claire are not prepared to do the right thing in parliamentary votes, she will not defy Jacob Rees-Mogg and the ERG and all of that. The only way of putting right this crisis is for the people themselves to do it in a people's vote. And remember, when they say we can't have a second vote, the people cannot betray the people. In this extreme crisis, and it is clearly an extreme crisis, in fact we've got this hall packed out in Devizes on a Friday night on a cold winter evening in November, and I find this everywhere that I go, and Molly will find the same thing. There's huge public interest. This idea that people are not capable of taking a decision on this huge, big issue affecting them, their children, and the whole future of this country, this generation, is poppycock. They can take a decision, they want to take a decision, you want to take a decision, and part of the reason you want to take it is because MPs are not doing the job which they're elected to do, which is to vote for the best interests of the country.
ladies and gentlemen, I'm conscious of time, so I'm going to pause questions there for a moment and invite Andrew to address us, and then we'll come back to more later on. So, Andrew, over to you.
Oh, thank you. So I'm now going to, I assume, duplicate everything that Molly's, what she's told you, because let's be clear, we're not going to disagree on much. I think maybe what I can do usefully, so I'm not duplicating any more than necessary, is to tell you where I think things are at the moment. Because there's an extreme crisis taking place in Westminster at the moment, and how we might get out of this crisis into a safe place, and what we need to do. The Prime Minister has negotiated her deal. It is 50 billion for a load of junk. There is no respect at all in which this country is better off leaving the European Union on her terms. And indeed, the Brexiters themselves accept that, because what they see with this highly convoluted backstop and an implementation period, and then semi-integrated arrangement in customs, where we will still be required to observe EU laws and all that for the indefinite future, but we don't have a role in making those rules in the first place. Their critique, which is Jacob's critique, is that he was saying that it was vassalage, but Jacob never likes to be underbid on rhetoric, so he's upped that last week to slavery. So the slave trade is coming back again if we leave the European Union on Mrs May's term. This is, by the way, his view of his own leader, that she's reintroducing slavery into the country. So I agree with Jacob. This is a terrible deal. And Dominic Raab, did you hear him on the radio this morning? He said that this is the guy who negotiated this deal with the Prime Minister. He says that we'd be better off staying in the EU than leaving on the terms which he himself negotiated. Which is quite an extraordinary statement. Someone said to me it's like you robbing a bank and then conducting a citizen's arrest on yourself on the way out. That is what is going on at the moment. I mean, it is truly surreal. So people like Molly and I think this is a bad thing, because the best deal for this country is the deal we have inside the European Union. We have members of the European Parliament, we have a seat round the table of the European Council, we appoint European commissioners. We have a fantastic deal at the moment. We should stick with it. But if we're going to leave, at least you've got to demonstrate that there are clear and identifiable benefits. And remember 2 years ago, the benefits that we were told were we were going to save loads of money. Do you remember the 350 million on the side of the bus for the NHS? We were going to take control of our laws, so we were going to have that big benefit. And we were going to be able to strike all these independent trade deals. Do you remember that? Remember Liam Fox telling us these were the easiest trade deals in history? And we'd have, how many was he going to have ready for signing the day after Brexit? 40, I think, wasn't it? So you had them all lined up because they were so easy to do. Well, now we know, because we're 2.5 years later, and the truth has caught up with the lies. There is no free lunch. We're going to have to pay 50 billion. So there's no 350 million a week for the NHS. On the contrary, the NHS is going to be starved not only of financial resources, but also of the doctors, nurses and staff, which are essential to make it work in the first place. So that's gone. That's not happening. Do you remember we also told that 7 million Turks were going to be invading England? Well, I keep looking for all these Turks. Maybe they're hiding here in Devizes. I haven't seen them anywhere in the country, and the truth is, that's not happening unless and until there is a treaty of accession with Turkey, which is going to be a long way ahead, and we, if we are in the EU, have a full and equal say in the terms on which that happens, so that's not happening either. Then the taking back of control of our laws. Well, that's clearly not happening, because as Dominic Raab and Jacob tell us, we have a new form of slavery, where we're going to have to observe all these laws, but not play any part in making them. So all of the promises have gone. We're now just left with the lies being exposed, and her treaty is before Parliament in probably 3 weeks' time. It'll be voted on. Now, it looks to me as if it's going to be voted down decisively by a combination of all of the opposition parties, plus about 20 Conservatives who are of the Dominic Grieve variety, who are basically pro-Europeans and take the view that we shouldn't leave on terms that are worse than staying in the EU. And then we have Jacob and what I like to call the economic ruin group. It certainly isn't economic research group. There's never any evidence of having done any research in its history. But some of them are going to vote against too. And of course the DUP are voting against. And I mean, they've already said that they think this breaks up the United Kingdom and all that, which actually they've got a point, it will do in terms of the existing arrangements in the United Kingdom because of this thing called backstop. So I think it's going down. Now if it goes down, only one of four things can happen, because remember we're leaving the EU in 4 months' time, that includes Christmas. So it's 3 essential negotiating months when you allow for the holidays. And the European Parliament has got to ratify the agreement and all the governments have got to be... So there's almost no time left. Theoretically, you could have a further negotiation. In practice, that isn't feasible. There isn't the time, there'd be no consensus on what it should be, and the Chancellor of Germany said last week, not aggressively, just as a matter of fact, that look, if we can't get the agreement that you want in 2.5 years, how is somebody going to do it in another month? So that's not feasible. The second possibility is that she tries a second vote, because in this unwritten constitution that we've got at the moment, you make up the rules as you go along. So she should, if she's defeated on it, she should then listen to the will of Parliament and then act appropriately. But I think there's a chance you might try for a second vote. So we might have a protracted crisis. But I don't see any reason at the moment why the second vote would be the same as the first. But I'm not absolutely certain, because by the time you've got Dame Marlene Foster, Sir Nigel Dodds, another £1 billion on essential projects for the future of DUP in Northern Ireland. Did you notice that there's a senior Tory MP out of nowhere was knighted yesterday? I mean, nothing that money and honours and all that could buy is not going to be tried during this process. So she might try for the second vote, but I don't think that will work either. The third option is what my leader wants, Jeremy Corbyn wants, is an election. Now, I personally am strongly in favour of an election given the crisis we're in, though it doesn't resolve the issue of Europe, because the first question everyone's going to be asked in the election is, what is your view of the withdrawal policy? And my view is that the first clause of the Labour Party manifesto of the next election should be, wait for it, a people's vote with an option to remain in the European Union. So you don't dump that issue by having an election. But I don't think there'll be an election, because that Turkey is voting for Christmas as far as Conservative MPs are concerned. Including Claire. I mean, she has a real run for her money if she's having to defend the fact that she believes in staying in the EU but has been voting against it here. I think you might have a thing or two to say about that here in Devizes if there's an election. So the fourth option is the people's vote, which has completely impeccable democratic credentials, given that this whole process started with a people's vote, but also because, of course, 2 years ago when we had the referendum, we didn't know what the terms of departure were going to be. We couldn't know them because they hadn't been negotiated. So the democratic argument is unimpeachable for a referendum. Parliament can pass the legislation. We'd need to agree with the EU a short extension of this thing called the Article 50 period to hold referendums. We couldn't realistically hold it by the end of next March, but we could hold it by next summer. So all of that is feasible. And as Molly said, the question should obviously be staying in the EU as against Theresa May's deal. So I think there's a good chance we'll get it on the Sherlock Holmes principle, remember the Hounds of the Baskervilles at the end, when all of the impossible things have been eliminated, you're just left with the improbable. Well, the impossible ones, including her deal, are being eliminated, so we're left with the improbable, which is the people's vote. If we get the people's vote, I'm absolutely convinced that we can win it, not just because the polls show it at the moment, but because all of the arguments now have moved decisively in favour of Remain, because all of the unicorns are being exposed. All of those fantasy offerings that were made 2 years ago are being exposed. But also, crucially, because the young who are passionately pro-European and against Brexit, I believe in a referendum next year, they will vote in unprecedented numbers. And as I see in the campaigns that I'm a part of, at the moment, the young are going to mobilise the young. There are big youth movements getting going in a really serious way, and I would expect in a referendum next year the turnout amongst voters under 30 will be as high as amongst voters over the age of 60, which has never happened in recent British electoral history. I also think there's very likely to be a majority in the House of Commons to give votes to 16 and 17-year-olds, which I strongly support in this crisis we're in, because they have more of their future at stake than anyone in this. They're going to have to live with Jacob. There's one, I was in a Watford Grammar School with yesterday with a whole load of sixth formers who are passionate about this. And one of them said to me, Lord Adonis, I want to stay in, and I like your idea of this people's vote, because I don't want to be shut up on a small island with Jacob Rees-Mogg, Nigel Farage and Boris Johnson. So I think we could get it, and if we do get it, what should the four arguments be? Very quickly to go through them. Firstly, do not trash your economy. 45% of our trade is with the 27 other nation states of the EU, for the perfectly simple reason, the first law of trade economics, trade halves as distance doubles. The reason why we have so much trade with the member states of the EU is because they are all our neighbouring states. We have more trade with Ireland than we have with China. Not, of course, because Ireland is larger than China, but because it's on our doorstep. And indeed, in Ireland itself, we have a 250-mile border with it. So don't trash the economy and don't trash jobs. Second reason, the young. The young do not want to be shut up on this small island, and any move outside the EU is going to imperil their opportunities to live and work on the continent. And we know that's true because the Prime Minister has already announced what the immigration policy will be if we leave the EU, that we will leave the existing freedom of movement rules. And did you follow what she said a month ago? What's going to happen instead is that people earning under 30k are not going to be allowed into the country from the EU, which means if you do the look at what's actually happened in recent years, about 2/3 to 3/4 of those who come won't be able to come. But the crucial thing for our young people, including the children and grandchildren of many of those here this evening, is that, and this was in the political declaration published yesterday, which used this in terms of the migration policy, deadly words, full reciprocity. Whatever Britain's policy is going to be vis-à-vis the EU on migration, the EU will require full reciprocity, which means Brits will not be able to work on the continent if they earn under 30k. Now, that means almost all young people will not be able to live and work on the continent. This is why we're going to win this referendum. When they wake up to the fact that they're going to be shut up on this island, they're not going to be able to work on the continent, which they've taken as part of citizenship, and before long they may even have to have visas to travel. I don't think that's going to wash with them. Third reason why we shouldn't do Brexit, Ireland. The only way of ensuring that there is not a harder border in Ireland than we have now is to stay in the EU, because anything else that requires different customs arrangements or immigration arrangements or regulations, and over time they're bound to diverge, will require a harder border. And you don't need to take the word of politicians like us for that. Just listen to the Chief Constable of the Police Service of Northern Ireland, who has said the single biggest threat to the peace of Northern Ireland, which has been hugely hardly won over the last 25 years with the Good Friday Agreement and the work of John Major and Tony Blair and the British and Irish governments. If we have Brexit on any of the terms envisaged, it will be an incitement to smuggling. Smuggling in Ireland is always allied to paramilitary groups, and it doesn't matter what the words on the page of the treaty say about no hard border, you will have to start doing random checks, stopping cars and trucks and all of that because of the danger of smugglers allied to paramilitaries getting hold of a massive new source of income and contraband. And what's the fourth and final reason why we will campaign hard to stay in the EU? Peace and security. Now, we didn't hear enough about this 2 years ago, but Europe is a very, very dangerous place. You've got Putin there who's already invaded one European country and has half occupied it, actually two, Georgia and the Ukraine, and he's taken over the Crimea. He has massive troops which are on the borders of the Baltic states, which are three tiny states, which have worked for the fact they're in NATO and the EU, and the two are indissoluble in their mind, could well have been invaded. It's a very unstable place, and of course you've got Trump. And no one knows when Trump goes into a meeting with Putin and just an interpreter, what on earth is going to happen afterwards. Indeed, we're petrified of it because of what he might do to NATO. So it's a very dangerous place at the moment. And what is the right thing to do? Not to make it more dangerous by pulling out of Europe. And why was the EU founded in its modern guise in 1951 with what began as the European Cold Steel Community and then became the Common Market and then the EEC and now the European Union? It was founded as a peace project. The reason why France, Germany, the Netherlands, Italy came together in 1951, you just need, and there's this excellent book which is selling outside, which I will sign copies of afterwards, which quotes the preamble to the Treaty of Paris, which is the treaty that set up the European Coal and Steel Community in 1951, which very, very foolishly we didn't join. It took us 20 years to join, and we might be about to repeat that mistake if we leave and have to start trying to rejoin again. But if you read the preamble, the opening sections of the Treaty of Paris, because most of the treaty is about nuts and bolts, about establishing a common authority to manage coal and steel and so on. The preamble is all about peace. It is about overcoming generations of bloody conflict. Those are its words, bloody conflict, in order to foster European civilization. Now, we've had 70 years of peace, the only 70 years in the consecutive years in the history of this continent when we've had substantial peace is the 70 years of the European Union. It could be a coincidence, but you know, I don't think it is, for two reasons. Firstly, the European Union is a club of democracies, and democracies are much less likely to fight each other. And the second condition for countries joining it is that they must guarantee their borders. And given ethnic groups which straddle borders, which has been the perennial cause of conflict in Europe, including, of course, in Ireland, which is why we had a civil war in Ireland until 20 years ago, this combination of democracy and respect for the rule of law and democratic votes, allied to a cast-iron commitment to safeguard borders, has held the peace of Europe for 70 years. And if we have this referendum next year, I don't think this time we should just have nuts and bolts arguments. We should have emotional and passionate arguments about seeing that this generation and the next generation do not have to go through the experience of the 20th century to understand why this concept of European Union is valuable, should be treasured, and we in Britain should be at the forefront of it. Thank you.
You're speaking to the converted. I think most people in this room are probably in support of people's vote, and I am as well. But I am slightly worried about mechanics. I mean, you say with confidence that it will be a choice between the deal and Remain, but I think it's possible that people in Parliament will object to that, and it could be a three-way vote. Now, if it's a three-way vote, I have been out, I mean, a lot of people are not following the arguments as closely as most of us here. And I've been out on the street stalls and spoken to quite a lot of people in the street about a second vote. And people genuinely say, get on with it. It's true that people are saying, I just want it over. People are fed up with it. Now, if that happens, there is a tendency amongst British people to actually dig their heels in and say, no, that's what I voted for 2 years ago, and this is what I'm going to vote for again. And instead of having the outcome we want, it's quite possible that we will end up with a vote for a no deal. I mean, I very much hope that doesn't happen. The other thing that worries me is actually the process of getting into a people's vote. If there's a vote in Parliament on whether or not we should accept May's deal in the middle of December, then there's a second vote after Christmas. We are only a couple of weeks away from actually leaving the EU. If May resigns, and then there's a leadership election, that is going to take up a lot of that time. There isn't time for a people's vote. What are we going to do? What is the process?
You may be right, of course. I mean, can I assure you there's no shortage of doom and gloom scenarios for us over the next 3 months. But you've always got to have a plan for the future which is optimistic, because we've got to try and get out of this mess. And can I paint for you the optimistic scenario? And if you have the optimistic scenario and you really go for it, then there's a chance you could make it happen. We won't have this third option of no deal on the ballot paper because it's undefined. No deal itself is simply, as I was saying, unviable. And I do not believe, knowing Parliament as I do, that Parliament would agree to have an undefined and impossible to implement option on the ballot paper. I just don't think that would happen. I think there might be the 50 or 60 votes from Jacob Rees-Mogg and the ERG for that, but I don't think even most Conservative MPs would agree to that. So I don't think we'll have the third option on the ballot paper because it isn't a possible option unless they can define it in a way that's practical, and I don't see that happening. It is true that we're coming up against the wire, but all of the best advice we've had, and Molly might be able to say a bit more about this from the perspective of the EU itself, is if we ask the European Council for an extension of this Article 50 period for the purposes of holding a referendum, not for more chasing of unicorns, but for holding a referendum, that they will grant us that extension for that purpose, and so that would give us the time. to hold a referendum? And do I think that it will be a repeat, and will people be, who formed a view 2 years ago, be very dug in? Let's be frank, a lot of them will be very dug in. There's no denying that. But I think the movement that there is movement towards Remain as people see the actual facts. And the other crucial thing, which I was said a bit about in my remarks a moment ago, is the new generation of voters. There's 1.5 million new 18, 19-year-olds. If 16 and 17-year-olds get the vote, that's another 1.5 million. And if the turnout amongst under 35s goes up sharply, as I believe it will, then that's a whole load more new people who vote. So it doesn't actually require anyone who cast a vote 2 years ago to change their mind for us to have a decisive majority for staying in. The only condition for doing that is that the young are mobilised. And as I say, my impression going up and down the country now is that the young are very much mobilised. Yesterday when I was in Watford Grammar School, this was a voluntary thing, I didn't have to come and they had to stay on after school. I had the whole of the school hall jam-packed. I was in Winchester the day before and they were queuing around the block and couldn't get in. And it's not because of me, it's because the issue is so important. I've never seen that before with young people. I think they're becoming politicised and mobilised in a way that hasn't happened before. So can I just say, you may be right, but let's be optimistic. Let's believe we can go for this and win, and let's go for it, because the alternative is terrible for this country.
When you realise you're in a very critical situation, to try and be prudent and to try and sort of be careful, and we have to do the opposite of that. We have to be bold and just go for it, because if we don't do that, we certainly will end up leaving the European Union, which is a catastrophe. So let's just have the courage and go for it. On the actual nuts and bolts of the people's vote, it is correct, I'm sure, that Article 50 period would be extended. But as Andrew said, only to have a people's vote, for democratic processes to play out, not just because we've made such a mess of the negotiations. And that's why, personally, I think it's quite unhelpful that Jeremy Corbyn keeps repeating that we'll go back and renegotiate, because that is just not a goer. But that has to be over by the time the European elections come. And I think some people are not quite aware of so that does still leave us a very tight time frame. I think it's very clear that it would just kind of make a bit of a mockery of European democracy if we either elect MEPs and then don't use them, or if we're sort of hanging around having our referendum during the European election period, and that's the end of May. So I think we do need to focus minds and make sure that this happens fairly swiftly. I mean, we do have time to do it in that time period, but we do, that there isn't a great deal of time, that's my view. I think it's also really important to say that the issues that gave rise to people voting for Brexit were not largely about Europe. People were fed up, they were just exhausted basically after nearly a decade of austerity. People felt that the financial crisis had resulted in the criminals that were responsible being rewarded and everybody else paying the price. People were fed up with just growing levels of inequality, appalling public services, tax avoidance. I mean, we could go on all night talking about the problems of the health service, the inability to get treated properly, failure of housing, appalling trains, etc., etc., etc. So I think it's really important that we think about that, because when we say we're going to stop Brexit, we're not talking about going back to the status quo. It's really important that we also address the changes that we need to make in this country. And I think that also helps to address the divisions we've got in this country, because if you put all those things I've just listed down on a piece of paper, 90% of people in this country would agree. I think people would be prepared to bring back higher rates of corporation tax to pay for the health service. Labour's manifesto at the last election, much of which they stole from our previous manifesto, but it is a social democratic manifesto which I think would command majority support in the country. That's the sort of thing we need to do to bring the country back together. So I think we shouldn't be afraid of having the people's vote because it might bring greater division. We should focus on the things we agree about, and I think mostly we do agree about those issues. And we should understand that Brexit was a symptom of a really troubled country, but we can come together to resolve those issues. I'm not quite as cheerful about where young people are at. I think it's brilliant that you go around and talk to them. I've got it on my list to do more of that. Because of course they are the people that will suffer most if we go ahead with Brexit. But I'm not, I saw the poll, the same Channel 4 poll I cited earlier, showed that young people were not more likely to vote this time, if they were given a vote now, than they were previously. So I think, if you look around the room now, we're not kind of overfull with young people. And I mean, of course, that, you know, we should be talking to them in the colleges and schools and so on, but I think we should also, all of us, and I've made a note to myself to do this, you know, engage with young people and do our best to make sure that they are mobilised and registered. And of course, it's difficult to register if you're constantly moving around. So it's true that if people voted to the same extent in each of the age groups, we would have won the referendum last time. So it's absolutely crucial that young people vote. But let's all go away from tonight making sure that we do something we can to make sure that is happening. And of course the other thing is that across my patch I have some areas that are extremely Brexity, you know, Swindon, for example, and Plymouth, and North Dorset is probably my most Brexity area. And I see shift in some of those areas, but not so much shift in other areas. The rural areas in particular, I don't think are moving, apart from Cornwall, are moving enough. So, you know, I think we shouldn't be complacent. There's a lot to do. It's absolutely true that we're probably speaking to people we agree with in the hall tonight, but what we need to commit to doing is going off and speaking to people who don't agree with us, and also moving beyond this into full-scale mobilisation, because I'm pretty confident we will get the people's vote, and I'm determined that we're going to win it, but that needs all of us to commit to doing that.
Thank you, Molly.
Thank you. It's just a very quick one. It's been really interesting tonight, and I think we probably are all of one mind here. But I guess it's a point and it's a question really, probably to Andrew, but also to Molly. Would you agree with me that one of the big risks to us getting this catastrophic ship of doom turned around is the fallacy of the jobs first Brexit? And if we stopped hearing about that from Jeremy Corbyn, we'd be in a much better place.
Yes. Thank you for that answer, Andrew. Lady Pascal?
Okay. Yes. We are many continental Europeans in this area around Devizes and Gibraltar, and we are all very worried because, in fact, there is nothing to secure us staying here and for our children, especially if our children want to go back home to where we come from. The diplomacy will not be recognized. So it is quite catastrophic, and I just wanted to have some reassurance that people will be fighting for us. Thank you.
Well, as I said during my presentation, I've really been shocked and ashamed by the way some British people, obviously not everybody, but some British people have really just behaved disgracefully towards people who have contributed so much to our society. And unfortunately, one of those people is the Prime Minister, and it's deeply shaming that that's the case. And of course, I confront that every day with my European colleagues, and I'm in a constant state of apology, quite honestly, for some of the things that are being said. I think, to be honest, in the negotiations, and particularly in the Parliament, the emphasis was put right at the beginning on citizens' rights and an attempt to take that out and agree reciprocally outside the other Brexit negotiations, and certainly an attempt to ring-fence that should we end up in a no-deal situation. But, you know, the British government has, I'm afraid to say, used EU citizens, non-UK EU citizens living here as bargaining chips, and they've done that very deliberately, I believe, and it's utterly shameful to do that. I think that obviously having settled status and having to apply for it and having to pay and so on is dreadful if you've lived here for many years and given and contributed so much to our society. But I think it does give you a certain amount of security. But my concern would be who's protecting that if we see a shift in the Home Office. You know, we've seen the hostile environment towards people from certain countries, and imagine we have a situation which I think is quite imaginable where we have an economic calamity if we go ahead with Brexit, and then there's a hostile environment towards people from other European countries, you know, you're taking our jobs. I can very much see that happening, and this is why if I was an EU citizen living here and not a British citizen, I would very much want to have the ECJ continue to protect my rights, and I've argued for that myself. It doesn't look likely that that's going to be forthcoming. But, you know, I just think this is one of many, many reasons why we have to make sure we don't go ahead with this.
Thank you. Hugh Norris.
Do you know?
All right.
I just had a question on from a media perspective that probably everybody here is following things closely, reading lots, connecting with lots of people and finding things out for themselves. You wouldn't know that if you were just a casual 10 o'clock news watcher on the TV. You just wouldn't. And I know that from personal experience. I formed a view based on the mainstream media. And for those probably most in the room don't know, I'm here tonight also to say that the will of the people is changing, and I know that because I voted Leave in 2016. And I'll apologise, but I've got to go beyond apologies and do something about it. And I've met more and more people who have been in the same position, and lots of us were informed the way we were on a pretty poor debate in 2016, and we've all had our various journeys to find out more and realise nothing that was promised is ever going to happen. It was a totally false prospectus. If people who voted Remain feel angry, imagine how we feel, because we've caused this and we believe people that we thought we should be able to believe, rightly or wrongly. We're in kind of such a dire position now that we've, as I'm encouraging people to do as well, and I would ask all you to do, is to please reach out to people who you think maybe or know voted Leave, and maybe instead of avoiding the subject, I'm telling you from personal experience, I know increasingly dozens of people who voted Leave and regret it, and increasingly they're becoming comfortable to be vocal about it. So the job we're trying to do as a voice that we think is missing from this debate is that voice. We formed a campaign called Remainer Now. It's on Facebook, website remainernnow.com, on Twitter @RemainerNow. And for example, even just a couple of weeks ago, about 13, 14 of us went to the House of Commons to meet MPs who wanted to hear all of our respective stories. How did we end up in a position to vote Leave? Why did we change our mind? And the taboo is going, and that's what we're trying to do. So if you told me 2 years ago, shortly after the vote, I'd be in a room, sort of a lion's den sort of a scenario, having this conversation, I wouldn't have believed you. And I went into that referendum incredibly open-minded. I knew it was important, and I didn't have a view either way. And the biggest change that I can tell you is happening on the ground, and people are reaching out to us more and more, is they said the debates were poor, they were ill-informed. The promises made from the Leave campaign were so green and positive, and we're going to have all this thing, nobody's going to lose any rights, everybody's going to gain. The Remain campaign was essentially vote for us or the zombies will come out, as Femi Olawale quite accurately articulated it. That's not much of a sell. So our message is reach out to people like myself who've changed our minds. We're increasingly ready to speak about it, but please sell the benefits this time. Sell the benefits. I don't want to hear about doom and gloom if we leave. I want to hear the benefits that I'm enjoying that I didn't know I had. And that's how you're going to get through it.
Just to say thank you for that contribution, very interesting. Andrew, I wonder if you might comment.
Well, can I just say, you've got nothing whatever to apologise for. You cast your vote 2 years ago. Remember David Davis, a democracy which cannot change its mind is not a democracy? You have an absolute right to change your mind. Everyone does. That's what a democracy is about. And remember, if we have a people's vote next year, the interval between that referendum and the last referendum will be longer than the interval between the last 2 general elections. We don't abolish elections because we don't like the idea that people might change their minds, do we? We have them periodically because you do need to refresh the will of the people. And in particular you need to in this case, because in this case we've got a fundamentally new piece of information, namely the withdrawal deal, which relates to an actual thing that is going to happen next year. So because if we don't reach a decision on that deal, we literally just drift out of the European Union. So everything that you said, Hugh, is completely valid, completely right. I tried in what I said earlier, and I know that Molly did too, to paint a positive vision of Europe. It is very clear to me that we took too much for granted on the whole issue of membership of the European Union. Because unfortunately of the Sun and the Daily Mail drip over the course of 30 years, We only looked at the negatives and not the positives. There are huge positives. Now, this has been the longest and most protracted period of peace and prosperity that Europe has ever enjoyed, and we take it for granted at our peril. And Britain has played a hugely important role in making it happen, including, of course, the whole way it started. Because when I came to grips with it when I was writing my book, of course, the European ideal and European Union, insofar as there's a single person who started this whole movement, it was, of course, Winston Churchill. It was his Zurich speech of 1946, which, faced with continuing crisis in Europe, with the Iron Curtain coming down, and with the real threat of massive further instability in Europe, he made that great speech where he called for, and these were his words, a kind of United States of Europe. And what the European Union is a kind of United States of Europe. It's one that has huge respect for the rights of individual states. It's not seeking to subsume the identity of individual nations and all that, but it's seeking to do those things at the level of the European Union, which only the Union can do in terms of guaranteeing free trade, having institutions that promote prosperity, requirements to resolve disputes by peaceful means, not by violent means as we've had in the past, having a parliament which brings people together from across the continent so that they can, as Churchill put it, jaw, not war. These are hugely positive things. And it's the younger generation who really sense that, which is the reason why, as I say, I think that they may, as it were, correct for some of the mistakes that are being made by some of the older generation. And we should encourage them to do that very strongly. Indeed, I'm encouraging them all the time to speak to their parents and their grandparents, because I think that may be how we overcome this.
Thank you. The gentleman at the back.
Sorry, in addition to trying to engage young people, what can we do in terms of giving them stake? You said we're unlikely to be in a position where 16 and 17-year-olds can vote. I can't see anything that's probably true. What can we do? What will governments do? Different parties do to give young people more at stake in say, growing back?
Well, there's going to be a whole new generation of 18, 19, 20-year-old voters, even if 16 and 17-year-olds are going to vote. But I think there's now a majority in the House of Commons for 16 and 17-year-olds to get the vote, because all the opposition parties support it, and a lot of Conservatives do. And remember that the Parliaments of Scotland and Wales have already given the vote to 16 and 17-year-olds in Scotland and Wales. So this is an idea whose time has come. And my response to that is that that should happen. And I think, again, which I set out in my book, it should be part of a package, and other parts of the package should be all young people should be automatically registered to vote at their place of study, so that we don't have this big problem which Molly was talking about a moment ago, of lots of young people not even being registered. I also think there should be a ballot box in every school and college, so it's easy for them to vote, whereas at the moment they're often not quite clear whether they can vote, where they study if they're at uni or at home. And I also believe we should take citizenship education in schools much, much more seriously than we have done in the past. You can't expect people just to imbibe this by a process of osmosis. If citizenship is important, knowing how your country is run is important, and telling people what really matters, including the truth about the European Union and not just the lies, then we do need this to be properly taught in schools.
The lady in the centre there with the...
I am a teacher of citizenship, and I can tell you how angry the students are. The day after the Brexit vote, I had students in tears in my classroom who were absolutely desperate to do something to turn this around. My concern is that Parliament will not get the vote through in time for 16 and 17-year-olds to vote. It is their future. My daughter had hoped to work in Europe as a biomedical scientist. She has now seen that ripped away from her. Please be advised that as part of the PSHE programme, our students of 14 and above are very well aware of politics, constitution and voting rights, probably better educated than some other people that make those decisions. Can you guarantee me? My question is about the timing around trying to change that ability in order for 16 and 17-year-olds and plus to have that chance to vote. Thank you.
Well, the answer to that is it's going to be tight, but it can be done. It can be done.
Fiona Harvey?
One of the possible options of the chaos we have at the moment is that there is a general election. What, as the people's vote, what should we do if that happens?
I had the delightful opportunity to try and win the Green Party's second parliamentary seat at the last election. I campaigned extremely strongly on the basis of my European credentials to win that seat. To be fair, I was up against a Labour candidate in a very pro-Remain seat who was also pro-Remain, although he's still not supporting a people's vote. And so I just feel that I agree with what Andrew said, a general election is not going to help us here at all, because people, when a general election comes, people vote on all sorts of different issues, and of course they do. And so if it, and also if we had a general election now, Brexit would just be hanging over the whole thing so much that how would people choose how to vote? I mean, I hope that if we got to the point where we had a general election, Labour would have the good sense to put, people's vote with an option to remain right at the top. But with the leadership they have, I'm not sure that would be the case. And if it weren't, then we're just going to probably end up in the same situation. The polls show that we have Labour and Conservative both on 40%, which is shocking, quite honestly, given the mess that the Tories have made of the country. But I mean, of course, I feel very strongly that one of the constitutional issues we need to address is that we need to have a fair voting system, so that the way people vote is actually translated into power in Parliament, as it is in the European Parliament, but it isn't in our Parliament. And Wiltshire is such a good example of that, because you've got all Tory MPs, although only about half the people in Wiltshire vote for the Conservative Party.
Following on from the last question, the Labour Party, 80% want to stay in the EU, actual party members. How can they actually exert some influence on Corbyn to make a more decisive stance?
Well, they have exerted quite a lot of influence already, which is why the policy that was adopted by the party conference 2 months ago was that we would oppose any deal that doesn't deliver the same benefits as the current single market and customs union, that we would then seek to have an election, but if we couldn't get an election, then all options should be on the table, including a people's vote with an option to remain. Now, that wasn't strong enough for me. I wanted there to be a requirement that we should support a people's vote. So this was a carefully crafted compromise.
You see that some wriggle room.
Yeah, there is some wiggle room, and too much wiggle room in my view. But as I was saying earlier, I think by a process of elimination we will get there. The crucial thing, the absolutely critical thing, is that Theresa May's deal should be voted down in the House of Commons decisively. If it's voted down in the House of Commons decisively, I believe in quite a short period of time, by a process of elimination, we will end up with a people's vote. But of course, if it passes, then that's the end of the debate. And if it's voted down by a very narrow majority, then she might try and hold the vote again, and that might also, to be blunt, encourage Jeremy to think that there's something short of the people's vote that he could do, which could involve a bit of unicorn chasing on his part. So the bigger the coalition and the stronger it is to vote down this deal, the better at the moment. So focusing on that really, really strongly, because unless a deal is voted down, then none of the other options come onto the table anymore.
Is there any way for the Lords?
Now, unfortunately, there isn't, because the Lords always take the view that on first order issues, the House of Commons has to decide. And though we do sometimes ask the House of Commons to think again about issues, given the nature of the crisis that we're having, we will debate the Brexit issue and we will vote on it, but that is just us giving our advice to the House of Commons. It's then the House of Commons that will have to take this decision, and I think rightly so on an issue of this kind. It should be the elected House, not the unelected House, which has a decisive view. The House of Lords is overwhelmingly in favour of Remain. It's extremely wise, the House of Lords. It only has one, sorry, it's not quite true, it has one B member, but unfortunately is a Brexiter. No, we will gloss over that, which is a big word. But the
80% of the Commons was for the...
I know. This will be... But where you should focus your attention really, really strongly, though, is on your MP here, or MPs and some people come from outside the Devizes constituency. Because though I don't think... I think Claire Coe is a minister, so she's clearly not going to vote against the whip when it comes to the first vote. But my sense is if this treaty goes down with a decisive majority, all bets are going to be off thereafter, and the situation will move very fluidly. And so if she's very she knows very clearly what the view of her constituents is about having a people's vote in the event that there isn't a majority for a deal. That could well be decisive in helping her get to the right place eventually.
Thank you, Andrew. I'm conscious of time, so I think we'll make this the last question. The gentleman 3 rows in.
If we do have a second referendum, and if we do end this Brexit nonsense, is Europe obligated to accept our change of mind? Or could they impose conditions upon this change of policy by the British people and government?
Molly, can I ask you to
That's an easy one, because we're still a member. We retain all our rights as they are now until we stop being a member. So nothing can be changed. We will maintain membership on the same rights, which are extremely favourable. We have all sorts of cake and eat it deals already, really. We have the best deal of anybody in the European Union. But the very important point to notice is that if we leave, we then lose all those rights. So if we left and tried to come back, which some people have suggested, we would then probably be bound to join the euro. We would have to give up the pound. We might well have to join Schengen as well, and we would certainly lose the rebate. So this is why we've got an extremely sweet deal. We'd be very foolish to give it up.
Thanks much for your question. So one more. One more question. Oh, gentleman in the
Roughly 3 months ago, there was a debate in the House of Lords on referenda, and as far as I remember, the vote was unanimous in favour of referenda on merely advisory and should never be used in a serious issue such as the European Union. The problem that I have, and I'm all in favour of staying the course, the problem I have is that we're in the same situation once again, merely an advisory advice to Parliament on what to do. Not constitutionally binding at all.
Do you want to take one more? There was a gentleman who said...
Yeah, this...
Okay, and then I can deal with that.
Yes, well, gentleman,
if we get into a people's vote situation, which is more probable, what measures the various pro-Remain groups are taking to coordinate their campaigns and manifestos, etc.?
Shall I take both of those? Let's be clear, a referendum in the situation, in the bitterly divided nature of the country at the moment, is, as Churchill said of democracy, the worst option except the alternatives. I don't relish it at all. None of us relish it, but we are where we are. And my judgment as a member of the House of Lords, but seeing what happens in the House of Commons very closely, is that the only way that you're going to get Parliament to have the courage of its own convictions, which is that we should basically stay in the European Union, is by the means of a people's vote. And you're absolutely right that legally it's advisory, but basically it will be decisive because of the practical political realities. So I think given where we're at, that is the right thing to do. Not easy. It's going to be very divisive, but nonetheless we should do it. And one thing I'm very conscious of, when people say that there might be unrest and all that, well, we don't actually do unrest in elections. You know, we're the oldest and most mature democracy in many ways in the world. But I'm absolutely not prepared to give a veto over our democracy to the far right, who claim that they might start whipping up unrest if the mainstream majority start wanting to exercise their democratic rights. And people need to think where that might lead, because that isn't just a matter for this referendum. That will be a matter for general elections and everything else that happens hereafter. Now, Nigel Farage, Jacob Rees-Mogg and all that lot, they cannot have a veto over our democracy. It's as simple as that. Our democracy should operate in a stable way, and I believe that if this proceeds, it will be entirely peaceful. Now, in the process of answering that question, I've clean forgotten the
question was what particular measures you're taking with the other pro-Remain groups.
Well, the pro-Remain groups actually have come together on the People's Vote. That has brought them all together, and you saw it, because many of you, I assume, were at the march.
Do you have a single website?
Well, there is a People's Vote website. They have the constituent groups have still got websites as well, but there is a there is now a greater degree of unity. But I think actually this applies equally to the other side. There's a big lesson in this for the referendum. One of the mistakes that was made 2 years ago was that there were the Leave side were allowed to have two completely different campaigns. They had one sort of respectable campaign, which had the members of the government, Boris Johnson and all of that on, and then we had the Wild West with Aaron Banks, Leave.uk, the Russian money, the 8 million which hasn't been properly accounted for, which is now with the police and all of that. And also, what you also had, which I think was completely unacceptable, was a whole load of different messages going out. So you had the more respectable messages about parliamentary sovereignty and 350 million for the NHS coming from the official Leave campaign, but then you had Aaron Banks and Farage and all of that whipping up what was, let's be blunt about it, straightforward xenophobia and making completely unjustified claims. Now, what should happen this time, there's a referendum next year, is one campaign on each side, properly regulated, social media regulated, no Russian money, and the BBC doing its job of being an independent. BBC, my good friend Andrew Adonis described me on his programme last night as the bubonic plague. Actually, as it happens, this is brilliant. I'm just doing the sales of my book once. I've already changed my Twitter, but my first line there is bubonic plague, because of course it's very infectious to be on bubonic plague. And I'm hoping it might sweep across the country very rapidly, and there's no known cure. So the only way we can now deal with the sweeping of the bubonic plague of the people's vote is actually to have the people's vote to stay in the EU. So it's fantastic. However, I'm not sure it's entirely appropriate for the lead political interviewer of the impartial BBC to be describing a people's vote campaign as the bubonic plague.
Thank you. And the last word, I think, to Molly.
Well, yeah, let's not start on the BBC. I don't start on that one. I completely agree with the point about democracy and so on. It's absolutely shocking that people would make an argument that's effectively intimidation. And I think anybody that gives house room to that hasn't actually understood the British people. Because if we try and use intimidation, people absolutely will resist that. We fought off fascists in the past. We are not having any of that nonsense in our democracy. But I think we need to go beyond that. We need to make a very strong case for democratic renewal. I mean, our democracy is struggling. I tried to talk about that in my presentation. And I think we not only need the constitutional reform, but really serious democratic renewal. And I think Brexit is already achieving that. And that, if we can get the people's vote, if we can unite the country and have a national radical platform, I believe that there's a really positive energy being released here as well. But I think it's crucial, to come to your question, that I think the campaigns are quite well coordinated, but there are quite a few of the same people involved, and I think what's absolutely essential is that we do make a positive case, but we also have really a lot of diversity in the people who are making that case, and we are having some of the same kinds of, the same kinds of people. I mean, Andrew's doing a wonderful, fantastic job, but we do need to have a lot of young people, a lot of, I think, minorities, a lot of women. I mean, the campaign last time was basically run between male Tories. Almost everybody we heard from was a male Tory, and that's still going on in the Brexit debate. So, we need to have a diversity of voices making a case for the European Union. And lastly, I mentioned already that I was talking to the Information Commissioner today, and I am not at all complacent about the way social media will be regulated next time. I mean, we don't have the controls we need in place, and I'm trying to suggest that the Code of Conduct, which has been suggested by the EU Commission, actually becomes mandatory, but that's unlikely to happen before our referendum, so we need to make sure that the bots and the fake adverts and the lies being reproduced and the profiling and so on is stopped as much as possible. We had Mark Zuckerberg in the European Parliament. I have to say he looked absolutely terrified about what he's unleashed. We have the super committee later this week, parliamentarians from across the world addressing what Facebook has to do, but Mark Zuckerberg's not agreed to appear there, so I don't feel this is sorted, but it's something we all need to focus on. We need to make sure that sort of, not only cheating, but fraud and psychological manipulation doesn't happen the next time around.
Yeah. Ladies and gentlemen, I think we'll draw the formal part of the evening to a close here. Compared to most of my local authority career, this is almost on time. I'll come back, if I may, to thanking the speakers in a moment. Just to say at this point that I think we've been privileged to listen to two outstanding orations by two perceptive and knowledgeable people, and we're very, very grateful. Thank you. if I may, slightly depart from the neutral role of chair to particularly thank Andrew in his 4 reasons why we should stay in the European Union, for mentioning the 4th, which is one that I'm passionate about, but hardly gets mentioned, which is that of peace and security. We've just been commemorating 1914-18, and yet so few people make the connection between that 39-45 and why the European Union was founded. I'd also like to take the opportunity, if I may, on your behalf, to thank those who put so much time and effort into organising this evening. Many of them have stood at the back and to the side there, and the whole of the Devizes for the EU campaign. Thank you so much. I'd also like to thank the audience for coming this evening and giving of your time for this very important matter. I'm proud to be in a community where so many people have given their time to come this evening and do this work. The one thing that I think I could describe you as, which I don't think many of us would have thought of ourselves as before the referendum, and that is activists. We're activists. And you've been encouraged by our speakers this evening to be active. So we shall go forth and be active. How shall we go forth and be active? Well, you'll think of many far better ways than me. But the key is clearly writing, email, letter, what have you, to our MP. I know we might think it would be futile, but we've heard why it wouldn't be futile. So we must do it. But I would also urge you to write to other MPs to support those who are against leaving the EU and in favour of the people's vote, to let them know they are supported, because they're under big pressure from the other direction, particularly, particularly the few in the Conservative Party, but actually those in the Labour Party as well. So I would suggest, Margaret, this means you, writing to Keir Starmer, Tom Watson, Nicky Morgan, and what we'd like to do, for those of you who've got emails, is email you some suitable MPs. It might be worth Sarah Wollaston, absolutely. So we'll email if we may. Part of your activism is obviously to give generously to support the organisation, and it just so happens there'll be 2 men with buckets collecting money on the way out, so if you could give generously, that would be appreciated. Another way of being active would be to volunteer to help Devizes for the EU in whatever way. It's not onerous, as much or as little time as you can, particularly seeking people unlike me who understand things called Eventbrite, no idea, and can help with mailing lists and that sort of thing. We're also going to be doing a survey of local businesses by email. So anyone who could help with that, again, if you could speak to one of the team as you leave, that would be much appreciated. Tomorrow morning, 9:30 to midday, but with our speakers there 9:30 to 10:30.
9 o'clock.
9 o'clock, as we're getting up even earlier. 9 o'clock, stalled in the marketplace with a Brexit-ometer for you to vote. So do please go along if you can. I'm going to stop there and hand over to our chief organiser, Kate Freeman, who's going to propose the vote of thanks.
Brexit has brought up some wonderful stars, and we've got 2 of them here in Devizes. We're really very lucky to have brought 2 wonderful stars, but you don't have stars unless you have people who can admire them, and that's you. And I want to thank you for giving up your time, and yes, you are activists, I can tell. We've had some wonderful people. People here in this room are not extremists. They're not, by any stretch of the imagination, people who are going completely berserk, who would even begin to think about Brexit. But some people some of the MPs have been talking about Remainers as if they're extremists, and that's wrong. So what I wanted to say here is that really we are people who've drawn a red line. We've heard lots about red lines, and we have a red line, and that's forced us to stop campaigning about transport and climate change. We'll carry on climate change. We'll carry on transport and climate. But those are the red lines, and I just wanted to quote Christopher Hitchens, if I may. History is often made, even if only by accident, by men and women who draw a line beyond which they will not be pushed. I also want to thank somebody who's not here, who's been very present, and that's the cartoonist for our poster called Jonesy. Some of you may have seen that cartoon, and I want to pass on our thanks to him for making this such an amusing poster.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, that concludes the formal part of the evening. As I said, while we stay and chat, thank you very much and good night.